Okay, so we've seen where we have found ticks. We've seen that Amblyomma variegatum, for example, has moved into areas where it previously was unknown. And I've also heard from, for example, Mark today that Heartwater is in potentially new areas as well. So the ticks are on the move. And it would be useful to know where they'll go next. So these are the historic maps of the ranges of Amblyomma ticks in particular. So this is a nice paper from Andalisa, a previous PhD student at Pretoria with Lewis Neves. And I've just zoomed in on Botswana. So again, we've got the same historic picture of Amblyomma hebreum in blue on the Hardveld, and then just up at the border with Zimbabwe and Zambia around Kasane area, some Amblyomma variegatum in green. And now from the data that Alice has presented, from some work from Owen as well, we know that these ranges have expanded slightly, maybe slightly into the Sandveld for the Amblyomma hebreum in red on the right-hand side. And for Amblyomma variegatum, they've expanded into the delta to the west. So we want to know where they will go next. We can't see into the future, but we can make predictions with models. And so for this, we use some machine learning methods, which is a type of AI. I think AI is a real buzzword now. This is a very old method that we've been using for a while, but it is a subtype of AI. And what we do is we take the occurrence data. So this is just an example for Europe, but I had access to a data set of over 30,000 tick records across Africa. So I took those occurrence data where the ticks are found, linked it up with explanatory data. So in this case, it was climatic data, rainfall, temperature, and so on. You run it through the modeling algorithm, and then you do various steps of validation. So testing the model, is it giving us something useful? So we can do internal validation where we just keep some of the data to the side to test it. And then the external validation is where you use a completely different data set, like the one, for example, that Virgil collected. We used that to test our models, like a sanity check for our models. And then once you're happy that the model is giving you something useful, you can then project it onto the current weather conditions. So as Lingasisi was saying, you can then use these methods to find what the likelihood is of that area being suitable for those ticks, even though we have never sampled in that area. So we can make those predictions and also predict the future distribution. So under different scenarios of climate change, for example. So this is an example with Amblyomma variegatum. So green indicates really high climatic suitability for Amblyomma variegatum. And anything with a color basically indicates some climatic suitability for Amblyomma variegatum. White indicates no climatic suitability for Amblyomma variegatum. And so you can see down here in Zambia, for example, and Zimbabwe, we're at the lower end of climatic suitability, but there are other aspects of tick ecology and tick epidemiology which drive abundance. So for example, how many cattle, how many wildlife hosts are present, the vegetation, the soil type, various things that are not included in these models that would moderate it further. But these are just broad predictions. And you can see all of the points on the right-hand side, the black points, they are the points that we fed into the model to train the model. They're very clustered in areas where, for some reason, someone was very interested in ticks in those areas. And then there are various countries, for example, the DRC, where there's very little data. And so with these models, we've made predictions for those undersampled areas as well. And then, so this is the climatic suitability, but what does this mean? So we thought for policymakers, if you have a risk of ticks and tick-borne disease, you want to know where are the communities that are going to be affected the most. So where are the most livestock and where are the rural communities that depend on those livestock the most? So so we've developed this risk index. So we first take the environmental suitability, the climatic suitability. And if we zoom in, this is Amblyomma variegatum again. I'll try and use my cursor maybe. you see that there? So this now, for the present climate, is predicting environmental suitability exactly where we are finding Amblyomma variegatum in Botswana. It's also predicting some environmental suitability where we currently find Amblyomma hebraeum, so our heartwater areas. And then if we pair that with livestock density data and then human sensitivity, so this is how rural the communities are, how much they depend on their livestock, and also there's an index of gender equality as well. We can derive this risk index. So I'll zoom in a little bit more on what is happening now and what's going to happen in the next 20 years for Amblyomma variegatum, or potentially is happening. So the communities most at risk of Amblyomma variegatum and any associated diseases are currently these communities where we have seen the problems in recent years. And if Amblyomma variegatum was present here, then it would be this community, these communities as well. In the future, this is expected to increase. The risk to these communities is expected to increase. It's expected to spread slightly south from the delta and then increasing around here and spreading north past Nata, for example. And again, this is climatic suitability only. And the same for Amblyomma hebraeum. It's predicting suitability exactly where we currently find it, but also high suitability of climate in the delta. We haven't identified Amblyomma hebraeum in the delta so far, but it doesn't mean it's not there. It might just mean that we haven't found it yet. So surveillance is important in that respect. So if we derive our risk index again in exactly the same way, now the communities most at risk are broadly the same as for Amblyomma variegatum, but here it's centered around Palape and Saroa. And that is mainly driven, unlike with Amblyomma variegatum, that was driven by how rural those communities were and how dependent they were on their agriculture. For Amblyomma hebraeum, it's characterized by the high risk or the high climatic suitability for those ticks in that area. So based on these models, I would suggest that Amblyomma hebraeum, Amblyomma variegatum is currently in Botswana affecting the more or the more sensitive communities. So where will they go next? And these are potential talking points. This is not what I'm saying is going to happen. It's just to stimulate some discussion. It's hypotheses. So for Amblyomma variegatum, we currently have them up here in the delta and around Kasane going to the Zambian border. Could they move further south towards the Hardveld area? And for Amblyomma hebraeum, they're currently in the Hardveld area. Could they move further north into the delta? And there are a couple of things for us to consider. For example, the foot and mouth controls preventing movements of livestock outside of the delta, and also different. You didn't show the soil maps, did you? But just different sort of biotypes that may be geographical barriers for Amblyomma hebraeum. But also there's something interesting about these. So many tick species can coexist, but for Amblyomma hebraeum and Amblyomma variegatum, they are, or they have been found in Zimbabwe and Mozambique to be parapatric species. That means that they have mutually exclusive territories and they overlap very little. And the researchers have found that this is because of sexual competition between them. So they will hybridize, but then that affects their the population growth. So potentially, and this is a hypothesis again, but something to be discussed, potentially Amblyomma hebraeum in the south is preventing the spread, because it's already very well established there, may prevent the spread of Amblyomma variegatum and vice versa. But, you know, this is something that needs a lot more research. Lewis Neves is working on this in Pretoria. But hopefully some discussion points and some thoughts, some points to think about in terms of future control and preventing the spread of these ticks. I've just spoken about the cattle, but what about wildlife? So again, with this huge data set of 30,000 tick records from the early 1900s to the late 1990s, so almost 100 years of data from all across Africa, in that data set, Amblyomma hebræum and Amblyomma variegatum have over 100 possible host species each. So they can infest a very wide range of species, not just cattle. If we pick out the elephant records, in that whole data set, there's only 174 elephant records. And within those, there's only one Amblyomma variegatum. So it's not impossible for Amblyomma variegatum to infest elephants, but it's very rare in this data set. And there was a recent survey in a few countries, including Zambia and the DRC, of 175 elephants, and they didn't find any Amblyomma variegatum. However, we do have over 2,500 records of Amblyomma variegatum. Most of those don't have a host associated with them, so where they didn't record the host. So that leaves us about 500, and the majority of those records were found on cattle, goats, and sheep. So livestock are posing the greatest risk, really. And then of the Amblyomma hebræum records, we have fewer of those because they tend to be localized in southern Africa and less widespread than Amblyomma variegatum across the continent. But of those, most, again, were not associated with a host, but 50% of the remaining ones were recorded on cattle, goats, and sheep. So they do have broad host range. We have to be careful with this data set because it is biased towards cattle. We need more data on wildlife. But it does seem that controlling cattle and goats and sheep is a very important element of all of this. So my suggestions for future research and is to look at tick surveillance, so identify range expansion early. So if, for example, vets know what they might expect in their area, they can tell the authorities if there's something different turning up. And some more wildlife tick research. The more you look, the more you find, and we can see that in the data sets where if we have more records for a certain host species, we find more, a wider diversity of ticks. So I'm sure the list of ticks infesting wildlife would expand as we conduct more research in wildlife. It's working. And then a suggestion I have, so it's on these tick cards that I've given to you, is that you can use this iNaturalist service. It's free. It's not my service or anything. It's something completely separate to me. But you can submit records, tick records, to this service here, and they become freely available for anyone to see. So I've made a project within that, and you can see that it's showing all of the tick records that people have submitted in Botswana. At the moment, there's not that many, but if everybody was submitting their tick records, if you are a vet, I know some of you aren't, but the vets, for example, you could look at what's in your district and see what people are finding and if anything new is coming up. And also, if you're competitive, there's a leaderboard, so you can compete with your friends and see who can submit the most records of ticks. I've made a little video on YouTube to run you through how to use it. But really, you don't need any tick identification qualifications to submit to this because it is a community. So you will submit a picture and you can just say it's a tick. Or if you know that it's a Bont tick, you can say it's a Bont tick, but you might not know which species. And then people within the community will suggest identification of that tick. And then as more and more people identify that tick and agree on that identification, your record can become upgraded to research grade. And then that's the highest grade. And then it can be used for surveillance and research as well. And again, this isn't going to me, this is going to sort of everyone to use. And so these are the tick reference cards that we have provided just for people to get like a quick reference of the different, the most common ticks that we've found in our surveys. And also there's a link there if you wanted to submit a record. And it wasn't my idea to make them translucent. It was another group in the USA who've done the same for their ticks. And I thought it was a really good idea because you could just hold them up against the tick and compare them. And a quick plug, we've produced some, and we will be producing more, some guides and videos, and we will be hosting webinars like CPD webinars and things on Zenodo, which is where we host all of our documents, and then the videos are on YouTube. And I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I think quite two things here. Concerning the folks and the average folks.